Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me. I'm delighted to have with me today Penelope Roskell, one of the leading voices in piano pedagogy, to talk about her Essential Piano Technique books, a fantastic resource for pianists at beginner and intermediate levels. Penelope is Professor of Piano and Piano Pedagogy at Trinity Laban in London, and her work has had a huge influence on how we approach healthy and musical piano technique from the very beginning. Thanks so much for joining me, Penelope, and thank you also for the complimentary copy of Level 2, which I've just received a few days ago, which is just here. I'll also put a link down in the description. But to start things off, could you briefly tell us or introduce yourself and tell us how the Essential Piano Technique series came about?
Okay, so hello everybody, and thank you very much for welcoming me, Marcel. So I'm a pianist, I'm a teacher, and I'm an author as well of various books. And I am very interested in piano technique at all different levels and piano playing at all different levels. So I am a professor of piano at Trinity Laban conservatoire, so I teach at very advanced level. But I'm also chair of the European Piano Teachers Association, where I'm working with teachers who are teaching at all different levels. So I'm really committed to helping teachers, supporting them, and really improving the quality of teaching and playing in this country. And so about 5 years ago, I published a book called The Complete Pianist, which is a huge, big, fat book, which I do have a copy of here, which is really for advanced players. As you can see, it's huge, and not particularly recommended for adult beginners. And I know many of you in this group are adult beginners. And once that came out, the publisher said, well, how about doing something for the beginning and intermediate stages? So it came about by an invitation from the publisher. And at first I was thinking, oh, that's a big challenge. I've never done that before, but I've actually really enjoyed doing it. So currently it's five different volumes. So it's the Essential Piano Technique series. And the first three, which are sort of take a student up to level 1. So that's about grade 1 in the UK exam system. But then just this week, the 2 new books have come out, and they're level 2 and level 3, and they take you from about grade 1 in the exam system to about grade 4. So that's sort of a good intermediate level. So I've tried to very progressively provide materials that teachers can use, or that pianists can use themselves if they're self-taught, that will give them all the materials they need to play both with great technique but also with great musicianship. So that's the purpose.
Okay, thank you. Well, what initiated this chat for me was that I recently came across your Essential Piano Technique series. It's written by you, but also the music is by Aaron Burrows. And I've been really impressed, not just by the depth of the content, but also by the clarity and the quality of the books themselves. I've got level 2, as I showed in front of me now, and I've been studying it and quite a few chapters of it. And I think the diagrams and the explanations are incredibly clear, and they really bring essential piano technique, I think, to life in a way that's easy to absorb. When would you say is the best time to begin piano technique in a focused way? I'm obviously asking on behalf of my adult piano beginners group on Facebook, and I know level 2 you say covers a kind of around the grade 1 to 2, but you also have primer levels as well, which I've just ordered myself.
That's great. Yeah, so you see, the way I approach technique, I mean, they're called Essential Piano Techniques series, but it's not just about technique. So I never see technique as being separated from musicianship and from the music itself. So what you'll have noticed in these books is in each lesson, each chapter, we start with some warm-ups, which are away from the piano, which are just getting the body moving, getting a good sense of coordination, of freedom of movement. Then we do some technical exercises at the piano, very simple exercises, and then we turn that straight into a piece, and that might be a piece by a composer you're very familiar with, by Bartok or Schumann or Tchaikovsky or one of the famous composers. Or it might be a piece by Aaron, because so he's written a lot of pieces which are really focusing on specific aspects of technique. And we've cut them very short, so there's not huge amounts of note learning to do. But I know your question was, at what stage do people think about technique? And so I don't think of technique as something which is divorced from music. As you can see, it's something which is leading towards music. So it's got a real musical purpose. So I think, the primer A is showing pianists how to develop good technique, even from the beginning stages. An example of that, for instance, is a lot of method books have always traditionally started with both thumbs on middle C, so that the pianist is playing in this way. Now you can see that doesn't look like a natural way to hold the hands, does it?
No.
My shoulder's a bit tight, my elbows are pulled in, and my hand is actually a little bit twisted in this way. So even in the very first few lessons of primer A, what we're aiming for is really just getting freedom of movement, using all the notes on the piano and coordinating the hand and the arm really well, so that the arm really supports the fingers as they play. So you do have a lot of strength, but also a lot of mobility and agility. So I personally feel that the sooner you can develop good technique, the better. And that doesn't mean it's complex. It can be very simple movements, because all the movements that we use at the piano are actually movements that we use in our everyday life. But sometimes we overcomplicate them by trying to play all the right notes and worrying about and getting tense. So what these books are about is developing real freedom of movement right from the beginning, so that you don't develop that tension, which can ultimately lead to pain and all sorts of discomfort and feeling uncomfortable at the piano, or even getting some sort of really severe injuries where you can't play at all, which is horrible if that happens.
You're really covering all three bases then, in combination with hand in hand with music, sound production, quality of sound, musicality, and healthy technique, so that to avoid any kind of potential injury, such repetitive strain injury, that kind of thing. Which kind of leads us on to the next question I have for you, which is what inspired you to write this series of books? Because I've read on your recent, I don't know how recent it is, but I've read in an interview on that you've had, I think, on your website with Faber, that you suffered an injury when playing the Liszt Piano Concerto No. 2 to your thumbs, something to do with the octaves there, because there's lots of double octaves there. Was it this injury itself that that started it all off, or was it something else?
Yeah, no, it was. And I just want to reassure the adult beginners in this group that when you're a beginner, you're very, very unlikely to suffer injury. Piano playing is very therapeutic. It's good for the mind, body, and soul. So don't worry at this stage about getting any sort of injury. But obviously, if you start off with some bad habits, and then you start to play much more complex pieces as you reach late intermediate and advanced level, and you're playing for longer periods of time, you're playing maybe sort of bigger stretches and so on, that's when these bad habits, which weren't so obvious at the beginning, can lead to problems in the future. And that's exactly what happened with me. I was at music college. Nobody had really advised me about safe practicing or safe technique. I'd had some good teachers, but I just hadn't been warned about the dangers, really, of playing these big. I didn't have particularly large hands, and Liszt concertos have a lot of octaves in them. And so my thumb started hurting. And people said, oh, well, if it hurts, it just shows you're practicing a lot, carry on. And of course, that's the worst possible advice, as you know. And so I had to stop, and I was devastated.
Do you mind if I interrupt you here? How, what kind of age were you? Were you already at studying at university, or yes?
I was at music college, so I was about 20.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, I was practicing many hours of the day, but without sufficient guidance. And I looked around and tried to find a teacher who would really advise me and tell me. And everybody just said they didn't know. I couldn't find anybody who could really advise me on this. So I immediately set to and just started investigating everything myself and trying everything out myself.
Mm.
Um, and that's what I've been doing ever since. And everything that if I find out that something works for myself, then I try it on my students. And if it worked on my students, then I'd sort of really make a mental note of it and then and that's what led eventually to a series of articles, which led to The Complete Pianist, which is sort of quite encyclopedic. Um,
So you weren't actually, nobody demonstrated a technique to you and said, look, you're doing this perhaps in a wrong way, which could lead to tension. You need to move things this type of way. You did your own research and
it was all trial and error. It
right.
really was. And it had to be at that stage because nobody understood these things.
No,
Or if they did, I didn't find those people. So I
yeah,
was doing it very much on my own. I mean, later on, I got to know other people who were working in the same field. We exchanged views. I read articles and things. So I did compare what I was doing with research that was going on elsewhere to make sure that I, what was working for me and what was working for my students. I was very confident that it was right, but
yeah,
I wanted to check it against other researchers as well. So that was also very helpful.
yeah,
But what I've been doing in these essential piano technique books is using all the principles that I learned for advanced playing for myself and that I also use for advanced students at music college. But taking all the principles and using exactly the same movements, but in a very, very simplified way. So it's really coming to the essence, with the kernel of what we need at the piano. So many of the exercises and the imagery and the examples I give in these early books are exactly the sort of techniques I would teach an advanced student if they got a bit of tension or pain or they were struggling with something. So
that's right. That's
there's nothing babyish about beginner technique. It's just using the very natural movements that the body wants to move and relating in a very natural and easy way at the piano. So we don't feel that we're building up tension and feeling anxious and feeling tense. So it's actually the most natural way to play the piano. But unfortunately, some pianists, just start to develop some bad habits. And then that starts to feel normal to them, and they don't quite realize that they've got a very tight wrist, or their forearm is very tight, or they're wondering why they can't play certain things. And it's often a very simple reason that they've just got the movement slightly wrong.
yeah. I think that's one of the benefits of this book, actually, at whatever level you are. And it helps you to, just looking through some of the examples, it just helps you to reassess some of the basics and think rather than just be on automatic pilot and just have another look at your technique. And it's very clear, I think, that beginners would pick up quite easily, well, as in be able to understand and try and put into motion some of the techniques that you advise. Um, your books do, well, in level 2, does introduce lots of important concepts like lateral movement of the wrist, circular motion. I think rotation was covered in an earlier books, perhaps. Spinning wheel image is there, which I think is a good way of kind of demonstrating or trying to give an example as to the movement. Then there's finger independence that you've also got there quite early on. Could you talk us through some of those movements? Maybe pick one or two that how they work
Yeah.
and why they're so important at this stage.
Um, I the rounded movements became an important part of this book. I mean, an important. So I've done a lot of preparation for it in previous books, but it doesn't matter if you haven't already tried moved through the previous books, because I put a certain amount of revision in these books
Yeah.
anyway. Um,
I did get the sense of that when I read through this. I thought, well, actually, this is starting. This gives a very good description of the overall posture. There's a sitting posture and everything else that you'd see at the very beginning of perhaps a method book as well. So I did notice that.
Yeah, yeah. So I did some warm-ups. So for instance, the warm-ups on the first page are just, doing big circles from the shoulder, doing circles from the elbow, doing them from the wrist, doing circles it's because circular movements really loosen up the joints. So we start our playing in a very relaxed way. And a big feature of this particular book is playing expressively. And I just wanted to show how the technique is the skills we use to play the music for our music making. So I did include a lot of rounded movements of various kinds. So for that we start with something I call gluey finger circles, where we just feel that we're putting our finger and sort of gluing it down, and then we're doing a circular movement around that. I think that was the exercise that's called spinning wheel, where we're just getting the feeling of the circular motion, and we build up that confidence in that step by step with different sort of patterns and different exercises.
Right.
So a lovely example of this is the Gigue by Samuel Arnold, where each bar has a phrase over it. So it naturally fits within a rounded movement to make it sound expressive. So it goes like this. Now, if I were to play that without any rounded movements, it would sound like this. Now, as you can see, it sounds a bit dull, sounds a bit inexpressive, but I wasn't intentionally playing it without expression. I was just intentionally avoiding doing the rounded movements, which meant that my fingers were having to work very independently on their own. My arm wasn't engaged in it, so it sounded a little bit dull. So I hope that's just one example of how these rounded gestures are so important in playing music expressively.
I think as well, it helps to stop sounding. It sounds less mechanical when you're doing the movements as well, and I think adding to expression as well as you can also, I think, get a lot of rhythmic feel out of using these kind of motions too. I think
that's a really important part of these books, actually, of talking about rhythmic impetus and how we, how we create an accent in the sense of moving forward and things like that, and breathing between phrases. But even scales, for instance, which everybody has to practice, what I'm really encouraging people is to play those expressively too. So
in a musical way.
In a musical way, so that it's much less boring to do it that way. And then it means that when you come across a scale in a piece of music, you're naturally going to play it expressively because that's how you've been practicing it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good advice. Many of the members in the Adult Piano Beginners Facebook group are self-teaching, they're self-taught, or others are working with a teacher, but there's a lot that don't have them. Will your essential piano technique books be helpful for those that are learning on their own? I personally think they're very, very clearly explained, but I just wanted your view.
Yeah, well, I've tried to include everything in the book, so there are videos for every exercise, and so that for every technique there are videos that I've recorded myself. There's a lot of technique tips. There's quite detailed instructions about how to do everything. So yes, somebody could follow it through on their own. As chair of EPTA UK, which is the Piano Teachers Association, I do feel that it's, every pianist benefits from having the guidance of a teacher. There are quite a lot of teachers now who are familiar with these books and can help you with them. And just having that hands-on advice is really, really valuable. But yes, there's enough information in there. There's enough guidance for anybody to follow them through. What a lot of people are doing, I also created an online course which is called Foundations in Piano Technique, and they use that alongside the first three books. So the first three books are a little bit sort of childish in the imagery, not in the content. The content is really mature, and the principles and everything are very serious. But I put some child-friendly wording in, some child-friendly images. And if you're an adult who feels that's not for me, Then I would avoid the primer A and primer B, but the Foundations in Piano Technique online course would suit you very well. You can, of course, always come back to the pieces that are in primer A and primer B because they're fantastic pieces, really interesting musically, but very, very simple technically. So I always say to everybody, these books can be used very flexibly. And you could, for instance, if you're, say, around grade 1 level, you may not want to go back to level 1 book. You might want to start at level 2. But if you think, oh, there's some things that I feel as though I've missed, you could do a little bit of revision by going back to one of the previous books. For instance, you and I, Marcel, earlier on were talking about a technique that I call the parachute touch.
Yes.
That's a really fundamental technique which teaches pianists to play with real ease because they're really harnessing the power of gravity.
Yes.
And I teach that technique to people in right in the primer books, but I also teach it to college students if they're really
right.
not using gravity and not got a beautiful cantabile sound. I think there's enough clarity in it for everybody to feel that they can use them quite flexibly, use them in the way that you feel would be most useful for you.
Yes.
I was very careful about the progression. The progression is slightly different from some of the normal method books because I wanted to just introduce each technique when I felt the pianist was going to be ready for it. And I didn't want, if you introduce some techniques too soon before the hand is ready for it, then you can end up sort of really getting tense and really getting stressed about it. So I tried to make it so that each step was very logical so that nothing felt like an overwhelming, huge step up.
And I think as well, it's the same with my book introduces technique, Hey Presto, this is straight away. And but I always say that these techniques aren't going to be, as long as we're trying to do a bit of movement, we're not aiming to perfect this in the first piece. By the end of the book, perhaps, or halfway through, you'll find that you'll be getting more natural with the movements, and then and hopefully by the end of it, you'll be quite adept at it. But it's something we're continually working on. Always, I'm always reassessing.
And I know you study with Mark Ray, who is a very knowledgeable man in this field. And I don't actually know your Hey Presto books, but I'm sure they're really excellent. And I'm sure they would actually probably work very well alongside these books. These could supplement any.
Well, that's right. I was thinking actually, this would be a very useful resource, not only for somebody just learning the piano, but actually as a teacher resource. So if I'll certainly have this on the piano and be able to go through, if we're going through any graded exam work or even diploma stuff, I could just say, look, here's a clear explanation of how to do circular motion or the spinning wheel or the parachute touch. Exactly.
Or
This kind of reinforces.
or pedaling or or whatever. Yes. So a lot of people are sort of moving through the book step by step, but similarly, if they're using your books, but they felt they needed just a little bit of extra resources or extra explanation, or they wanted to watch the videos, or they wanted to try some of the pieces, then they could always dip into a particular section of one of these books and then come back to where they are in your method books. So that was always the intention, that they could be combined with method books. And sort of slightly sort of cocks and box between them and
well, I think that would be a good way to be able to use these books, and I think that's a good resource for it. And so finally, I want to come to our top 3 tips, which is something that I ask a lot of people that whenever we come to the end of an interview. I wondered what top 3 tips you could give our adult piano beginners who are perhaps just starting out.
I think here I'm going to summarize some of the things I said earlier on. Firstly, if you're practicing technique, always try and think of that as preparing the technical skills that you're going to need in your music making. So don't think of technique as separate and the boring bit of your practice, think of it as having a real purpose, a musical purpose. So that's the first tip.
That's the first step. Great. No, I
Yeah.
think that's very important. Sorry, I'm letting you run the show here. So
Okay.
yes, I think that's important, really, to think ahead. It isn't just, we're not doing technique for the sake of technique. We're doing it because there is a purpose behind it.
Yeah.
There is some meaning,
Um,
and that's musical meaning.
and I think that my second one is aim for freedom of movement. By that, as you could see with just that little example I gave you of the rounding movements, my arm was very free, my wrist was free, my elbow and shoulder were very free. Um, and and if you get the freedom of movement, you'll start to feel really good at the piano, but you'll also get the flowing gestures that also help the music to flow. I only gave you one very simple example earlier on, but flowing gestures make the music flow. And I think my third little piece of advice is if it feels good, it will probably sound good. And I often have students saying to me, well, am I doing this right? And I say, well, does it sound right? Does it feel right to you? Um, and once it starts to feel right, then they feel at ease. And they feel at ease with the piano, and the relationship between the pianist and the piano becomes sort of symbiotic. It works. So it all feels very natural. You feel at ease, and the earlier you can feel that, the more pleasure you'll get out of your piano playing, and the more pleasure you'll get as you develop through the higher levels as well, and feel that, oh, now I'm really ready to play more advanced pieces, and I've got all the skills there ready for me. So when I come to a new advanced piece, I'm not suddenly thrown into, oh, I've got to suddenly do really difficult rotation, really difficult forte passages, really difficult octaves, because you've built up to that gradually. You've got all the skills all in place, and so these new pieces feel really quite easy.
So you're transitioning seamlessly between techniques.
Yes.
Thank you, Penelope, for sharing your wonderful insights today and for also taking part in the top 3 tips. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Penelope, for sharing your insights with us today. Essential Piano Technique Level 2 is a beautifully thought out book that explores a wide range of essential techniques, from expressive playing and coordination to balance, control, and sound exploration. What really stands out are the clear illustrations and the wonderfully memorable explanations like parachuting onto the first note, and the emphasis on using the hand and wrist to support the fingers in producing a rich, controlled tone. If you want to understand these qualities and the underlying technique outline, then I can't recommend this book enough. It's engaging, accessible, and I'm looking forward to looking into the next in the series. Thanks again, Penelope, and to all of you for joining me.